So I don't intend on making a long video today. Just wanted to give y'all, for whoever cares about these things, just some thoughts. In full disclosure, I don't really celebrate Juneteenth or July. I mean, it's not like while I understand while it exists, it's not like a holiday for me that, in the grand scheme of who I am as a person, it doesn't do much for me. Even on July 4th, honestly, and this may sound as unpatriotic as possible, what July 4th is to me is, at this stage of my life, is getting some fireworks that I'm going to put in my backyard for my kids. I don't have a real affinity for July 4th either. It just is what it is. Like and some people can be offended at that, and that's fine. I don't really make videos that I don't expect people to not be offended at. But this morning, which was somewhat predictable, I don't use Twitter as much as I used to, but I happened to see this on Twitter this morning. This is what I saw on Twitter. And then while I was talking about some stuff, something else came in. So here's what happened on Twitter. Hopefully you can see this. All right. This is from Charlie Kirk, professed Christian, head of Turning Point USA. And here's, if you can look at this on your screen, here's what Charlie Kirk says. This is what he tweeted. I think this was yesterday. Says, if Juneteenth was really about emancipation, why not September 22nd, 1862, when Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation? On January 1st, 1863, when the proclamation took effect, on December 18th, 1865, with the ratification of the 13th Amendment, because it's not about emancipation, which was one of America's great moral achievements. It's about creating a summertime race-based competitor 2 weeks before July 4th, which should be the most unifying civic holiday on the calendar. All right. So that's Charlie Kirk, ladies and gentlemen. And then his right-hand woman, Candace Owens, this is an article that just says, Candace Owens mocks Juneteenth holiday. And let me just read to you simply what Candace Owens said about Juneteenth. And this will probably not come as a surprise, but here's her comment. Juneteenth, here's her tweet. Juneteenth is still ghetto and made up. Hope everyone enjoys it. And then that's that. All right. So I just wanted to, I'm not going to take long. I'm not even sure why I'm commenting on this, to be honest. I just think it's fascinating. So there were other tweets that Charlie Kirk put out about Democrats race baiting. And it just seems like when it comes to these issues, when it comes to anything that has to do with race, what I see from my limited vantage point, I could be wrong. I'm not the Lord. I'm not omniscient, not omnipresent. What I see from my limited vantage point are conservatives like Charlie Kirk, Candace Owens. They're the ones that escalate this to be something that most people, I'm not even sure, really care about. Like, Charlie Kirk doesn't know me. I'll never meet him. And if he is a believer, hopefully I'll see him in heaven, more repentant. But I don't get the fascination. Like, I get that Joe Biden put this holiday into place. I get that. Ronald Reagan put Martin Luther King's birthday as a federal holiday. I don't get the fascination here and the pushback. So first and foremost, let's talk facts. Why is Juneteenth even celebrated? Well, slaves were freed in 1863, but for 2 years, a lot of slaves, particularly those in Texas, were still treated as slaves for 2 years afterwards. Can you imagine how many people would be offended if they had loved ones in the military, found out that the war that they were fighting was over, right? The war was over, and yet their loved ones were still being told to fight as if the war was not over, whatever, right? Or worse than that, if their loved ones were prisoners of war and they were now freed, but they weren't aware of it, and so they were still living as slaves, people would go berserk, right? The whole point of Juneteenth, whether you like the holiday or not, is that slaves were actually informed that you're free, to which, had they not been informed on June 19th in 1865, had that not happened, they may have been slaves a lot longer. And the reason why we believe this is because right after Juneteenth was put in place something called the Black Codes, which were restrictive things against Black people that led to Jim Crow laws of some 10 years later, right? So it's safe to say that wouldn't have happened. That's the whole purpose of Juneteenth, is just to tell people, hey, this is a real thing. And because race and slavery have been such a core fabric concerning, idea, reality in our country, it's just acknowledging something that exists. I mean, we have people who still march and celebrate the Confederate, like there are hundreds, thousands of schools in America that are named after Confederate soldiers. Candace Owens one time had said that she thinks they should be allowed to have that flag. These people are traitors to America, right? Because you fought against your own people to keep slaves. So that's the purpose of Juneteenth. I'm not sure how that's not helpful. Now, Charlie Kirk said this in his tweet, which I'm going to put back on, which I thought was interesting. Listen to this. Charlie Kirk says that because it's not about emancipation, which was one of America's great moral achievements, it's about creating a summertime race-based competitor 2 weeks before July 4th, which should be the most unifying civic holiday on the calendar. All right. So 2 problems with that perspective. One, Juneteenth is not existing 2 weeks before July 4th to discredit July 4th. It was literally, historically, the day when some slaves were informed you're no longer slaves anymore. That's all it was. It has nothing to do with rivaling July 4th. It wasn't like they waited until 2 weeks before July 4th in 1865, June 9th, and that's not why it exists. So that's a stupid argument. And this is what I mean about the theological gospel, like people who are so convinced that the way to be a Christian in America is to have a certain view of the economic and historical view of America that I think rivals what the Bible teaches, to be honest. And this is a different point I'm going to make in a different video tomorrow. But so that's the point of Juneteenth. It has nothing to do with rivaling July 4th. Now, if you want to make a case that Joe Biden put it into play, that's on you, but there's no historical precedent for that. That's stupid. The other thing that he said was that July 4th should be the most unifying civic holiday in America. So let's put this in perspective. This is just history. You can call it, this isn't woke, this isn't Marxism, this is just actual history. All right. So the reason why that Great Britain and what was then the colonies went to war, which we call the American Revolution, which was also called the Presbyterian War, according to the Brits, because it was a religious war. A lot of they called it that. They saw it from that way. We call it the American Revolution, right? The reason why America, the colonies, went to war was because of the tyranny of the taxation from the British that the colonies were having to pay. They were tired of it. Keep in mind that by the time this American Revolution happened, there were no people who were born in Britain that came to America that were alive. So those people grew up solely and only in America and were tired of having to submit to the tyranny of the King of England. In fact, if you look at the Declaration of Independence, the majority of the language is pushing back against the tyranny of the King of England. Americans or people in 13 colonies, which became America, felt enslaved to their British ancestors and got tired of it. And so there was a revolt. America won and then developed its freedom, which is independence, which is July 4th. So the whole point of that whole war was to break free from the slavery of Great Britain. But during that time, you maintained the slave code for another 90 years or so, maybe 89 years or so, before it was actually functional in America. So everyone's supposed to celebrate July 4th as the greatest civic holiday, but people who were still significantly enslaved. And let me tell you something. When people talk about slavery, they often think of just owning another person. They don't talk about like the rigors and the brutality of slavery. They make it seem like slavery was like you're a waiter or a waitress for some rich white family. No, what slavery in America entailed was the killing, the raping of women and children, and men raping white slave owners, raping black men, calling it buck breaking, just to get out their gay fantasies and then and to psychologically control black people. You had the selling of children from their families, which tore apart. I mean, there's any mom who loves her children is going to lose her mind if so. I mean, and even today, a parent's greatest fear is someone taking your child and the harm that could happen. And imagine you watching your children be sold away, your daughter, where you know she's going to be raped, and your son, and you can't do anything about it, right? Those things were happening. Women being raped, right? Being killed, the torture, all those things were a part of slavery. It wasn't just, oh, okay, you're an indentured servant. That's the way sometimes people act like slavery was. It was very brutal. And I don't know if you saw The Passion of the Christ, right? The Passion of the Christ that Mel Gibson did was the first movie that I saw that felt like gave me more of a visual representation of what it may have looked like. Like, I know that wasn't Jesus. It was acting. It was fake blood. It was fake. But it gave me, I wept as I watched it, not because I'm believing that but because I know that this happened to Jesus and what it meant, right? It's just more brutal than we like to give it credit for. Slavery was more brutal than we give it credit for. And the psychological impact of slavery is so significant to what's happening in our country that we haven't really fully gotten over it. Some people have and moved past it, but others haven't, right? So you have that. That's a reality that people just pretend like that doesn't matter, right? Here's the thing, though, also. Charlie Kirk also said, I don't see black people thanking the 300,000 soldiers who lost their lives in the American Civil War, right? Civil War. There's a lot to be said there, and I don't know what that would look like, but let's just say one thing. The Civil War was a significant moment in American history, and we are grateful that there were men who thought that way and who fought and they gave their lives in war. But let me say a couple things, and I'm not trying to be insensitive in any way, shape, or form to people who have family members that participated and lost their folks in war. Let me say a couple things about that. The first is, as America defined itself as a Christian nation, you don't get a pat on the back for ending something you should have never participated in the first place. All right? Like, you just don't get a pat on the back. A husband doesn't get a pat on the back because he's no longer beating his wife and his children. That's what you're supposed to do. America said it was a Christian nation, unlike any other nation in the world, and it established itself as from religious liberty, right? To honor Christ. And you basically spent hundreds of years breaking the second greatest commandment. So thank you for that. But at the same time, if you're a Christian nation, we should have never had slaves in the first place. Second thing I would say is that, when you sign up to go to war, you go to wherever wars are happening. To make it seem like those soldiers gave up their lives solely for the freedom of, sure, but back, even in the military now, when you sign up to go to war, you are sent to war wherever they go. It doesn't matter if you want to fight with the Iraqis or Iran. If we go to war with China, it's not like, well, now you can drop out of the army, but you can drop out of the military. There are consequences for that, right? You're going to be court-martialed if they catch you, right? There's breaking the law to do that. It was no different back then, and many of those men had no choice. They had no other social skills that would pay them any money for them to just be like, hey, I ain't fighting this war. I'm going back to where? It wasn't like the country had a lot of opportunities. So a lot of these people who signed up in the military, there was a means to an end there. It wasn't just, I have a personal conviction to fight against racism in the South. It was, I'm signing up because I have this is helping me provide for my family or help me be a man, whatever the case may be. And whatever war that was going to happen because your commander in chief, the president, determines what war you're going to fight in once you sign up to be a part of that country, the armed services. So while yes, a lot of men, white men, did give their lives for slaves, you'd have to prove that they did it out of a personal conviction against slavery, when even is documented that Abraham Lincoln didn't have that personal conviction. Now, he may have been influenced by Frederick Douglass at some point, but this is documented. This isn't even woke. This is just documented. It wasn't like Abraham Lincoln was like really trying to. There was more going on of why he pushed back to allow that war to happen between the North and the South. All right. The next thing we have to also take into account, and this is the thing that always confuses me about this conversation. We keep saying slavery was a long time ago, 100%, right? 100%. But so was Independence Day was a longer ago. We celebrate that. We celebrate Charlie Kirk. Look at what he said. Look at what he said. That this is it should be the most unifying civic holiday on it. So when we say, well, that was a long time, well, July 4th was a long time ago. There's no one that was alive now that was alive when July 4th happened, but we celebrate that, right? We only celebrate the things that benefit some people, but not others. We celebrate that. So like it being a long time ago doesn't even add. But here's the thing though. Here's the thing. July 4th ended once and for all Britain's tyranny against America and against the people who historically came from Britain, but now generations have passed. You're talking about 169 years passed. So they weren't connected to Britain at all, right? So, but there was never a time that we're aware of where Britain was able to come back and add laws and punishment against Americans. Well, there may have been some stuff that they tried to do, but America established itself as its own nation. It took Adam Locke's cultural economic theology and applied that to what we now call capitalism. All of that stuff existed. You developed the Constitution, all these things, and you slowly adjust over time, right? When slavery ended in 1863, which was announced in Juneteenth for everybody, by 1865, that was not the end of tyranny against Black people. You had right after that the Black Codes, which were 10 years of essentially. Let me be clear. Let me say this real quick. America's original sin is not racism. That's a stupid argument. I see why people make it, but it's not a good argument. America's original sin is consumerism. It's greed. It's money. Slavery was not a race issue. It was an economic issue. And after slavery ended, the Black Codes, which then became another 90 years, or roughly 80 to 90 years of Jim Crow, those were economic sanctions against Black people for no longer making white people money freely. So this is all about money. Race has been the devil's greatest hustle. It's really about money. There is racism there. You hate Black people, but it was largely because you were so used to Black people making money for white people historically. So Jim Crow, so those laws after that were economic sanctions. Slavery was a long time ago, but you have to consider right after it, for the next 90 to 100 or so years, the civil rights law started was 1964 was the first one. So 1865 is Juneteenth. 99 years later was when finally America said, we got to stop this. So for those 99 years, Black people were woefully mistreated just because they were freed from slavery. And it was terrible. So when you say slavery was a long time ago, you're right. But then you had almost 100 years of psychological terror. You had the Ku Klux Klan, our domestic terrorism organization, that were allowed to freely run. So many things happen. I'm not even trying to get into all of that because that's not the point of this post. The point of this post is just saying, listen, when we talk about, one last point, I'm sorry. And this is the most important point, actually, from a Christian's perspective. When Jesus said this to the Jews of his day, he said, the Ninevites are going to rise up and judge this generation because someone greater than Jonah is here. And then another section, he said, Sodom and Gomorrah are going to rise up and judge this generation, right? Because they were, all this, they repented and things like that. we have to remember that God does not look at things as that happened a long time ago. God looks at things like that happened, right? When you and I stand before God, I've said this before, when you stand before God and we give an account, we're not going to give an account for the things we're doing in the moment. We're going to give an account for things that we did throughout our whole lives. Every time, the Revelation 20, 11 through 15 through 20, Revelation 20 verses 11 through 15 are going to be all these people standing before God, and they're going to give an account for what they've done. And some are going to go to the lake of burning fire, the second death, and some of us, by his grace, are going to be with him in eternity. All judgment from God is on things historical. All judgment from God is on things historical. To dismiss history selectively by highlighting only the things that America did well, is to dismiss how God intends to evaluate us. All people are going to give an account for what they did historically. God does not see, oh, well, Kurt, you lied a long time ago. That happened. No, you lied. You did this. It's not going to be like, oh, well, you know what, man, technically that was 70 years. No, it's going to happen. And so I think sometimes we have to realize when we stand before God and give an account, God doesn't care how long ago it happened. You know, a day is 1,000 years to the Lord. God could care less about how long ago it happened. What he does care about is it happened. And it happened while people were saying they believed in me. So this is why I've always been like, man, why are you defending theologians like Jonathan Edwards and them? You don't even know if they made it to heaven. In all seriously, we have no idea if George Whitefield, Jonathan Edwards, any people who were Christians that owned slaves, that were violating the second greatest commandment. Jesus said in Matthew 7:12, listen, whatever you wish others would do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. So when you spend hundreds of years violating that, I don't know if these people are in heaven or not because they had good theology. Shoot, Jesus told in Matthew 23, verses 1 through 3, he said, look, the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat. So observe what they tell you, but don't imitate what they do. So Jesus, he didn't say, don't listen to the Pharisees, only listen to people who come in my name. He said the Pharisees, people who are disqualified from the kingdom, God is going to still use the theology that they have because they sit in Moses' seat, but don't imitate them. He said your righteousness has to exceed that of the Pharisees in Matthew 5, right? So you can't say that because someone had good theology. God will use people that have good theology that are disqualified from eternity when they stand before him, right? We just be wilding, bro. We just be wilding. I took some time off. I need to be back, man. People be wilding. We got to take this stuff seriously, fam. So yeah, you might disagree with the holiday, cool. But like most of the holidays that we celebrate are a long time ago. And we can't only celebrate the things that we think that some of us think are worthy of it. We celebrate all these things. So all that to say, I think Candace Owens, it is what she's going to do every year. They're all grifters, whatever that is. But I don't know. That's what they say to each other. You know, they're just all deceived. They're very deceived. They're very deceived. While I wasn't out marching yesterday and all of that, and shit, I wasn't even thinking about it. But I understand that like holidays don't have to be connected to only accomplishments that white people did. They can be accomplishments that black people or other people have done. And that's nothing wrong with that. That's not woke. But in this day and age, we've become so offended at things that we disagree with from a sociological, anthropological, and economical level that we don't even ask ourselves, what fruit of the spirit is my response? What fruit of the spirit is this? We don't even ask that. We don't even care anymore. We're just like, whoever agrees with us, we riding with. Well, you know where I ride. I'm not riding. The only side that I'm on is the one that pierced Jesus with the sword, where the spirit was. I don't care about all this stuff, but I'm going to push back. I think it's just dumb. I think it's dumb. Just like I would push back against people who think because they were slaves, you can still celebrate July 4th. I don't think because there was still slavery, we can still celebrate July 4th. I'm not going to not do that, but I'm also not going to sit here and act like that Juneteenth is not something real because Candace Owens doesn't think it is. You just don't know your history, and you don't know the lingering consequences of history. You don't know that. Do you know Jews are still getting reparations? They're still getting money from Poland, Germany, and France for what happened in World War II with Hitler and them. That was like 80 years ago. That was a long time ago. But there are still people that are getting money, and the U.S. government is paying that money. They're still getting money from a long time ago. So, what do I know, right? What do I know? I'm probably woke to some of you. Cool. But I would rather be awake than asleep. And I think, man, listen, this is America. We can celebrate a lot of things, but don't act like this stuff that pertains to the suffering of an ethnic group, African Americans, Black people, whatever you call it, don't act like that stuff is woke, but celebrating the history of what white people have done is somehow A1. It's like, nah, it can all be celebrated, it can all be rejected. But I, for one, am just not going for it. I'm not the sharpest tool in the box, but I'm sharp enough to cut a little skin. And if that's what happened, so be it. Kirk Kennedy, sorry that I've been gone. Life has been crazy, but I'm back. See y'all tomorrow with a fresh video.